I'm from Virginia.
Virginia.
A 19th century soldier finds himself on Mars, embroiled in a power struggle between multiple factions. I dig. Just today I was in the food court where I became embroiled in a power struggle between hamburgers, kebabs and dim sum, which is a total shame because I only went there to eat the sandwiches that I brought in from home. However, while you're on Mars, you might as well do the Barsoom Blitz. John Carter.
All right then, Sola. Just play along.
John Carter was a 2012 fantasy adventure film directed by Andrew Stanton and adapted from an Edgar Rice Burroughs story. The movie is legendary in film circles for being a notable box office bomb. The film itself, though, is not necessarily one that deserves that rap. Not completely. It's certainly not perfect and has its problems, but on balance, it has a lot going for it. But then again, that's exactly the same thing they said about my cookbook. At least it's not McDonald's.
The first item is beans.
John Carter is a wealthy man that dies, leaving his estate to his nephew, Edgar Rice Burroughs, with the caveat that the nephew maintain Carter's tomb and allow nobody to enter.
See, my name is John Carter.
Sorry, that's my accent. That should be John Carter. Through flashbacks in his diary entries, we learn Carter was a former Confederate soldier who'd lost his family, lost his desire to fight, and lost the directions to a mysterious cave of gold.
Company under your command nearly turned the tide.
Colonel Powell of the US Army tries to press gang Carter into working for them, but that doesn't take, and during his escape from first the Army and then some Apaches, Carter and Powell take refuge in a cave of gold. But there's a mysterious being in there with an even more mysterious medallion, and after a struggle, Carter finds himself in a strange and unfamiliar place. Look, this happens all the time. I once ended up in Honolulu in much the same way. Though, of course, the key difference was I had a 12.5-hour flight, plus I suppose I did specifically book the flights, and yes, if I'm being honest, it's absolutely nothing alike. Where John Carter finds himself now is far less humid than Hawaii, and there's a little chance of ruining a pizza with pineapple. Alas, there's also little chance of any pizza. Eventually, though, we'll learn that Carter is on Mars, known locally as Barsoom. His bone density and his growing up on a world with different gravity has given him the ability to jump huge distances compared to the native inhabitants. But then there's the complex local situation where John will find himself in the middle of the various factions on the Red Planet. So there's Red Faction 1, Red Faction 2, Red Faction Guerrilla, and unfortunately Red Faction Armageddon. The Therns are ancient immortals who are rarely seen in their natural form, but use their powers to manipulate various people. There are the green-skinned Tharks with 2 legs and 4 arms, which means the main local industries are producing wristbands, bangles and gloves. They capture John Carter, put him in with their hatchlings, and after drinking some magical drink, they can all understand each other. Carter's befriended by Sola, whose father, Tars Tarkas, is the leader of the Tharks. Man, if I was from the East End of London, we'd have to bleep this video so much. The red humanoid Martians are often at war with one another. One faction from the city of Zodanga are led by their leader, or Jedak, Sab Than, who's being manipulated by the Therns in his war on rival cities.
Do as we command and you will rule all of Barsoom.
Contrary to what you might think, the rival city of Helium does not produce balloons for kids' parties, nor do they sound like this.
I know the terms set by Sab Than.
The daughter of the Jedak of Helium, Princess Dejah Thoris, is at one point rescued by John Carter, where there's clearly a moment. You notice this, right?
You let me know when it gets dangerous.
There's some sort of power on Mars, the Ninth Ray. The Therns have given it to Sab Than to use as a weapon, while Dejah Thoris is more interested in its positive potential. The Ninth Ray also powers the medallion that allows travel between Earth and Mars in less time than it takes to open up the sick bag. Carter wants to find a way back home, while Dejah wants John to fight for her city, to help stop the war, otherwise she'll be married off to Sab Than. Carter learns that he's on Mars, and Dejah learns that he's from Earth. She will need some more information, but it's possible that the medallion could send John Carter home. This is much more complicated than it being a giant teleport system. It is in fact a form of astral projection, where John Carter's body is still in the cave on Earth, but his spirit is presently in his Martian body. Basically, you're in a coma back home while you remote control another body on another planet, which really only makes a sort of sense if you understand that Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote this story decades before rocket travel was viable. It's a thing you just have to go with, much like the woefully naive science in my great-grandfather's science fiction short stories, Balloon to the Moon, Tram to Saturn, and a bawdier tale about dating on Venus. John and Deja are clearly enamored with one another, but soon separated by events. Deja has returned home, where of course she has to marry Samantha.
Take me hostage. What?
No! No! The white imbecile has taken my sword!
Carter is taken aside by Thurn leader Matai Shang, who helpfully and quite conveniently explains what's been going on every time one of these chrome domes appears on screen. Shang also seems to have more than a cursory knowledge of Earth.
She and anyone else with knowledge of the Ninth Ray will be eliminated.
If Carter's going to free Deja from marrying McNulty, he'll need an army. The Tharks, though, have had a change in management with Tal Hages in charge, who, like Sab Than, has the Therns in his ear. After surviving in the arena, Carter challenges Hages, who lasts about as long in combat as a triple choc ice cream sundae with extra syrup and sprinkles stays untouched on a cheat day. Carter now has his army, but don't you know it, they go to the wrong city, and then Carter has to race for the right city to stop the wedding of Deja and Sab Than.
His fate is sealed, Earthman, as is yours.
The film's big climactic battle scene sees the Tharks show up to take on the Zodangans, but hopefully they can tell the difference between Zodangans and those from Helium. After their victory, Carter and Deja marry, and everything's looking pretty good for Carter in his new life on Mars.
John Carter of Mars.
That is until... well, shit. According to his journal, Carter had used his wealth from the Cave of Gold and financed the search for more medallions since it was clear that there were more Therns on Earth. When we think he's found one, it turns out it's all been a ruse to get an actual Thern to investigate Carter's tomb. Carter can return to Mars, and as so long as his body remains safe in his tomb, things will be just peachy. The movie John Carter was released, and things were not just peachy. John Carter the movie was alright. It's entertaining, has a pretty good cast, and it's well made, but it just did not connect with audiences at the time. Whispers about production problems before release and a poor marketing campaign that downplayed what the film actually was were often blamed. That and the fact that there weren't necessarily huge numbers of potential moviegoers with knowledge or love of Rice-Burroughs' work. By 2012, it had been an awful long time since the heyday of Tarzan movies. The film itself wants to paint a grand picture of the situation on Barsoom, building up the world and a large cast of characters, all of whom have very fantastical names dreamt up by an author 100 years before the movie. On the page, they're fine, but like trying to win a hot dog eating contest, they are a mouthful when characters have to say these names in dialogue.
Not like that.
Part of the problem, as I see it, that when you're creating a massive fantasy world with multiple factions and its own technology and names for everything, where it's almost a high fantasy world that doesn't have an explicit earthbound analogue, it can just become a little bit much for audiences to absorb. In a book, an author can just stop and have a couple of pages of exposition or descriptions or backstory, or a character's thoughts can fill in the blanks. In the film, you need to show things or have people say things. However, for most of the movie, John Carter is a man of few words.
Captain John Carter.
And his narration is limited to a few journal entries featured mainly towards the end of the film.
This is the task I entrust to you along with all my fortune. Protect my body.
And come to think of it, there's actually a simpler way to outline the plot of John Carter, since it is almost exactly the same as the 1980 Flash Gordon film. Extraordinary Earthman, played by an actor who's not going to get a lot of work after this, finds himself on an alien world, gets involved with local factional battles, makes allies of locals who are initially hostile to him, and he has to prevent his sweetheart from being married off to the villain. I mean, this of course ignores the fact that the source novel, A Princess of Mars, predated the creation of Flash Gordon by a couple of decades. Also, I'm reliably informed that Flash, he'll save every one of us.
Do that again and I...
Carter may have influenced dozens of similar heroes over the decades.
Carter's alive?
But the property's lack of visibility compared to other characters who'd had live-action adaptations doesn't help its case.
Our home is Barsoom, and you came on one of your sailing ships across millions of carats of empty space.
There's an argument for dumping most of the Earthbound scenes at the start and end of the film, where you'd get Carter to Mars as soon as possible and maybe finish the film with his marriage, which was something the director was advised to do. However, the John Carter character was in 11 novels, and if anybody's spending more than $200 million on a movie in the 2010s, chances are they were looking to kickstart a franchise. Edgar Rice Burroughs' most famous creation was Tarzan, but he was also the creator of John Carter's fantasy adventures set on Barsoom. Burroughs would make a fortune off the multitude of Tarzan movies, but after having read a bit about him, I sure as shit wouldn't let my time-travelling daughter marry him. Burroughs wrote the first John Carter novel, A Princess of Mars, and managed to sell it as a serialized story, where a novel would be split into chapters and published in subsequent issues of a magazine. The character would eventually appear in 11 novels and would later be featured in a comic strip. The idea of a film version of John Carter was first mooted in the 1930s as an animated film, though it wasn't until the 1980s that an idea of a John Carter feature film would become a possibility at Disney, though effects technology was still not quite at the point where the story could be convincingly realized. Of course, by the early 2000s, forget about it. With computer graphics, you could do almost anything on screen, and sometimes it was even convincing. Paramount had the rights for a while, with the idea of first hiring Robert Rodriguez, then Kerry Conran, then Jon Favreau. But then the studio had other ideas and let the rights lapse.
Princess of Mars. How about that?
Andrew Stanton, who directed the hit Pixar films Finding Nemo and Wall-E, pitched the idea of him directing a live-action version of John Carter to Disney, if the studio of course could grab the rights and pick up the tab. However, in 2009, Asylum got there first with a low-budget adaptation of Princess of Mars, starring Antonio Sabata Jr. and Tracy Lords, and it looks exactly how you think it looks. Which is to say, it looks cheaper than my Uncle Roger, who's so cheap that he won't buy a camera to take on vacation. Instead, he gets his family to photobomb other people's holiday snaps. Stanton and Disney were hoping that Pixar magic would be transferable to a live-action movie. What they got was the Pixar methodology transposed to a live-action movie, where that wasn't necessarily the best way to do a live-action movie.
This will not do at all.
Taylor Kitsch as John Carter is growly and a man of few words. He's introduced in a way that makes him a fearless badass, but on Earth at least, he's not as totally fearless a badass as he thinks he is. Taylor Kitsch was an actor who seemed like he was going to be the next big thing after appearing in the series Friday Night Lights. But after that, some of his subsequent starring roles just didn't pop. Some might say his movie career had a hex on it, though he's still doing high-profile projects for television.
You miss me?
Like Kitsch, Lynn Collins had a role in X-Men Origins Wolverine, where she played Wolverine's girlfriend. John Carter would be the highest profile movie project of her career, though she might be better known from stints on True Blood and The Walking Dead.
A fitting solution for your setback. Wouldn't you say, Captain?
Collins and Kitsch both worked well as a believable on-screen pairing.
But Virginia fights for us.
The Farks were voiced by various actors: Willem Dafoe as Tars Tarkas, Samantha Morton as Sola, Thomas Hadyn-Church as Tal Hagis, then as Lesser Farks, David Schwimmer, Polly Walker, and Jon Favreau. Bryan Cranston appears as Colonel Powell, and most of the rest of the cast were British: Dominic West, Ciaran Hinds, James Purefoy, Art Malik, and Mark Strong as that bald guy who appears to be up to no good in the latest line of Mark Strong's bald guy up to no good roles. Though I'll always remember Mark Strong from his voice telling everybody to shut up just before a movie started in some UK cinemas.
Hello.
I assumed that was a recording and that he wasn't just going around to random theatres in the UK in a really bad mood.
You are ugly, but you are beautiful.
John Carter the movie looks almost amazing. It looks very good. It's not 100% amazing, just somewhere around the 87-88% mark. The designs look great. The Martian cities look grand and are full of detail, and the battle scenes mostly work quite well. There are times when some of the effects work, well, it insists upon itself. There are scenes where Taylor Kitsch is composited into a scene with CG acting partners, and there are times when it looks just a little phony, like he's calling in from a Zoom call with a Martian backdrop.
As advanced as it will ever be.
The Farks are obviously CG creations, and they do look pretty decent, but they're not perhaps on the level of Avatar from a few years earlier. Though at the very least, there weren't perhaps so many weirdos freaking out because they couldn't live on Barsoom.
They are not real.
The film was shot in studios in Britain and on location in Utah, though as an effects-heavy film, the line between what's a studio shot and a location shot is much blurrier than my vision after a long day at the whiskey distillery, where I work as a taste tester, well, a janitor. In a fairly solid movie, one of the brightest of bright spots is the very John Williams-like score from Michael Giacchino, where the music is at once epic, upbeat, and romantic.
Who is to blame?
Andrew Stanton was of Pixar, where their way of working was to iterate. In CG, if something doesn't work, you can tweak the animation, the lighting, rewrite a shader, that sort of thing. You could get the actors to come in and record some more lines. With Pixar's track record, you could have the time to keep refining the film, its stories and its characters until you were happy with it. Stanton took that methodology to live action. where scenes were often reshot, and the director was upfront with the studio that they would be reshooting a lot of scenes along the way. Reshoots after principal photography have become a standard way of fine-tuning films for a very long time, where they can change emphases, soften or harden characters, fix the ending, and more often than not, just make sure that there's enough dialogue to explain the plot. The idea of reshoots has become linked to the idea that a film is in trouble, perhaps exemplified by certain movies where reshoots did not improve the film. Okay, well, the theatrical version of Justice League is a very obvious example of this. On John Carter, Stanton got Disney to agree to a larger than usual reshoot to clarify things, as well as adding the major Martian battle at the start of the film. Reshoots can help a lot, but of course, the longer that a reshoot process runs for, the more expensive it can be. John Carter's budget of between $250 and $300 million was less than Disney's 2011 Pirates of the Caribbean movie, but it still got to the point where the film would have to clear something like $700 million at the box office before it became profitable. Now remember, the film's budget will eventually include marketing costs, and the box office take does not go 100% to the studio, where of course it's shared with people like exhibitors. Hence there's that rule where the big films have to make around 3 times their budget to be considered profitable. An adaptation of a book called Princess of Mars was never going to be called A Princess of Mars, but the original title of John Carter of Mars was shortened, perhaps to hide the fact that there was any hint of science fiction or fantasy, or that any of this was on the planet Mars.
Fate has brought you here, John Carter.
Honestly, this is totally a fantasy movie. That wouldn't be a problem if the marketing was up to snuff. Spoilers, the marketing was not necessarily up to snuff. The idea that the film was not going to be a massive success was slowly expanding outwards throughout the industry, with more and more people in the business pretty much just waiting for this film to fail. The director's confidence in his movie was not shared by an increasing number of people. John Carter was released in early 2012, where it was an expensive movie that made slightly less at the box office than its final budget. The one silver lining is that it beat out Taylor Kitsch's other 2012 movie, Battleship. Of course, that's not much of a silver lining if your name is Taylor Kitsch. The failure of the film financially is a shame. The marketing obviously was not much of a help, but the final product doesn't quite gel into something that will appeal to a mass audience. Stanton felt that enough people would know the character from rice-burroughs novels from a century earlier, but realistically, John Carter-style characters had filled action and adventure movies for decades, to the point where actual John Carter meant pretty much nothing to the vast majority of moviegoers who'd never heard of the character. Disney would take a write-down on the film of around $200 million, which is a lot. But I'd neither cry for them nor gloat over them, since they did have the year's biggest moneymaker in The Avengers. Plus, even the much maligned Pixar film Brave did around twice the business of John Carter. By this time, the company was also in negotiations to buy Lucasfilm, so it's possible the company wasn't too concerned since they were about to own the Star Wars franchise.
No more, Carter.
So, the film died a death at the box office and was stuck with a bad reputation. Watching the film on its own, quite divorced from its poor reception on release, I find it's an entertaining watch. It's not perfect, it is a movie that doesn't quite reach its potential in being accessible to people for whom these are completely new characters and situations. It is, though, a solid effort that should have been a really good fantasy movie. Still, at the time of making this video, an animated adaptation's in development, which could be an interesting way to go. John Carter was a film about a guy who goes to Mars. Not that you'd necessarily know it by the way the film was marketed, but it is a fantasy epic that's not without entertainment value, even if the studio behind it has no more tharks left to give. If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
It's time to enjoy the big screen experience.